The April wind cut through Eleanor Hayes' threadbare shawl like 1,000 frozen needles as she stood in the doorway of what had been her refuge for 2 weeks. Behind her, 7 pairs of eyes watched from the shadows of the cramped attic room. Her children, ranging from 10-year-old Rose down to 6-month-old Alice, who whimpered softly against her eldest daughter's shoulder. For her stood Howard Blackwood, her stepfather, his face twisted with a rage that barely masked something far more sinister. "You have 1 hour," Howard said, his voice low and venomous. "1 hour to gather your bastards and get off my property." Eleanor's hands trembled, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. She was 24 years old, a widow of 6 months, and she thought foolishly, desperately, that family would mean something. That blood, even diluted through her late mother's marriage to this man, would count for something when she had nowhere else to turn. She'd been wrong. "Please," Eleanor said, hating the break in her. "It's still cold at night. The children, little Alice has been coughing. Just let us stay until the weather warms, until I can find work." "Work?" Howard's laugh was cruel. "What work can a woman like you do? A woman who creeps into men's rooms at night, who offers herself—" "That's a lie!" Eleanor's voice rose, sharp with desperation and fury. "You know it's a lie. You came to my room. You tried." She choked on the words, on the memory of 3 nights ago when she'd woken to find him standing over her bed, his breath reeking of whiskey, his intentions unmistakable. She'd screamed, she'd fought, she'd managed to push him out and barricade the door with the room's single chair. And the next morning, he'd spun it into this, a tale of her seducing him, of her using her widowhood to prey on his generosity. Howard's face darkened. "Mind your tongue, girl. I've told everyone in Willowbrook the truth about you, the shameless widow who tried to trap me into providing for her endless brood of brats. No one will believe your lies over mine." The truth of it hit Eleanor like a physical blow. He was right. He owned half the land around Willowbrook. He'd been married to her mother, Catherine, for 3 years before Catherine's death 2 years ago. People respected him, feared him. Eleanor was nobody, an Irish immigrant's daughter, married to a man who died leaving nothing but debts and 7 hungry mouths to feed. "The children are innocent," Eleanor tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever you think of me." "I think you're a burden and a whore," Howard interrupted, "and I want you gone." But he paused, and something calculating entered his eyes. "I'm not completely heartless. Your mother, God rest her misguided soul, had that cow, that stupid Jersey cow she insisted on keeping even when I told her it was a waste of feed." Eleanor's heart stuttered. Clover, her mother's cow, the one Catherine had brought from their old homestead, the one she'd loved with an almost childish devotion. "I'm giving her to you," Howard continued. "1 cow for 1 widow and 7 brats. It's more than you deserve. Take her and go. If I see you anywhere near Willowbrook after today, I'll have the sheriff arrest you for trespassing and attempted theft." He turned and walked away, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Eleanor stood frozen, her mind reeling. 1 cow and 7 children, and no home, and no husband, and winter barely over. Rose appeared at her elbow, her thin face pinched with worry far beyond her 10 years. "Mama, what do we do?" Eleanor looked at her daughter, at all her daughters and sons, crowded in the doorway now, their faces showing varying degrees of comprehension and fear. James, 8, was trying not to cry. Lily, 6, was already crying silently. 4-year-old Samuel clutched his toy horse, the one his father had carved. 3-year-old Grace held 18-month-old Henry's hand, both of them too young to understand, but old enough to sense danger. "We pack," Eleanor said, forcing steel into her voice. "We take what we can carry, and we leave." They had so little. The clothes on their backs, worn and patched, 2 blankets, a cast-iron pot, a wooden spoon, the photograph of Thomas that Eleanor kept wrapped in cloth, the only image of their father the children would ever have. Everything else they'd owned had been sold to pay debts after Thomas's death in that terrible accident with the thresher 6 months ago. Eleanor moved through the attic room mechanically, folding clothes, wrapping the pot, trying not to think about where they would go or how they would survive. April in Saskatchewan was treacherous. Warm days that promised spring, followed by nights that still dipped below freezing. They needed shelter. They needed food. They needed— "Mama, look!" Rose stood at the small window. "Uncle Howard's men are bringing Clover to the yard." Eleanor moved to the window. Below, she could see 2 farmhands leading her mother's Jersey cow toward the front of the house. Clover was a beautiful animal, brown and white with large, gentle eyes. Catherine had loved that cow, had talked to her like a friend, had insisted on milking her herself even when Howard complained it was beneath her station. "Your mother was soft," Howard had said once, watching Catherine in the barn, wasting affection on livestock. "It's unnatural." But Catherine had just smiled and continued her work. And later, she'd told Eleanor, "Clover gives the sweetest milk you've ever tasted, and she's gentle. When you were little, you used to fall asleep against her side in the barn. She never moved, never startled. She kept you warm." Eleanor felt tears burning her eyes. Her mother had been dead for 2 years, lost to the consumption that ravaged her lungs through one brutal winter. Catherine had been the buffer between Eleanor's family and Howard's coldness. With her gone, there'd been nothing to protect them. "Come," Eleanor said to her children. "Help me carry our things." They descended the narrow attic stairs for the last time. Howard was waiting in the main hall, watching them with undisguised contempt. His housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, stood beside him, her face carefully neutral. neutral. Eleanor had appealed to her 2 nights ago, had told her what Howard had tried to do. Mrs. Pemberton had looked away. "Employment is hard to find, Mrs. Hayes," she'd said quietly. "I have my own family to feed. I cannot afford to anger Mr. Blackwood over accusations that cannot be proven." So Eleanor carried her small bundle of possessions past both of them without a word. Rose and James each carried a blanket. Lily held the pot. Samuel refused to let go of his wooden horse. Grace and Henry clung to each other, and Eleanor held baby Alice against her chest in a sling fashioned from her shawl. Outside, the April sun was deceptively bright. The snow had melted from the fields, leaving mud and the promise of new grass. The wind, though, was bitter, carrying the memory of winter. Clover stood patiently in the yard, a rope halter around her neck. One of the farm hands, a young man named Robert, who'd sometimes slip the children extra bread from the kitchen, handed Eleanor the rope. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes," he whispered, not meeting her eye. "For what it's worth, I don't believe what he says about you." "Thank you," Eleanor managed. It was something. It wasn't enough, but it was something. She took the rope. Clover looked at her with those large, calm eyes, and Eleanor felt a connection, not just to the cow, but to her mother, to all the women who'd been pushed aside, cast out, and forced to survive with nothing but their own strength. "Come on, girl," Eleanor murmured. "We're in this together now." She turned her back on Howard Blackwood's house and began walking. The children fell into line behind her, Rose taking charge of the younger one, James helping Lily with the heavy pot, all of them moving with the exhausted determination of people who had no choice but to keep going. They walked down the long drive toward the road. Eleanor didn't look back. If she looked back, she would see the house where her mother had died, where she'd hoped to find safety, where instead she'd found only shame and rejection. Looking back would break her, and she couldn't afford to break, not with 7 children depending on her. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of mud and melting snow leading away from Willowbrook toward where? Eleanor had no plan. The nearest town was Riverside, 15 miles to the north. But what would she find there? More closed doors? More people who'd heard Howard's lies and believed them? They walked for an hour before little Samuel started crying. "Mama, I'm tired. My feet hurt." Eleanor stopped. They all stopped. The children were exhausted, their thin shoes inadequate for the muddy road, their clothes offering little protection against the wind. Baby Alice was fussing, hungry, and cold. Rose's lips had a blue tint. James was limping. "We'll rest," Eleanor said, trying to sound confident. She led them off the road to a small copse of trees that offered some shelter from the wind. They sat on the damp ground, huddling together for warmth. Eleanor looked at Clover, who stood nearby, calmly chewing her cud as if she hadn't a care in the world. The cow had been milked that morning. Eleanor had seen the farmhands doing it before they brought her out. But cows needed to be milked twice daily. By evening, Clover would be uncomfortable, her udder full. An idea sparked. Eleanor had helped her mother milk Clover countless times as a child. Catherine had taught her the technique, the rhythm, the gentle pressure required. Could she do it now? Could she milk the cow and give her children something, anything, to ease the gnawing hunger in their belly? "Rose," Eleanor said, "watch the little one. I need to try something." She approached Clover carefully. The cow regarded her with those gentle eyes, recognizing something, perhaps the scent of Catherine that still lingered in Eleanor's touch, perhaps just the basic kindness in her approach. "Easy, girl," Eleanor murmured. "I know you miss her. I miss her too." Eleanor had no bucket. She pulled off her wool shawl and fashioned it into a makeshift bowl, holding it carefully beneath Clover's udder. Her hands remembered the motion, the alternating pressure, the gentle squeeze and pull. The first stream of milk hit the shawl and soaked through immediately, but Eleanor adjusted, found the rhythm, and soon milk was pooling in the fabric. It wasn't much. It wasn't sanitary, but it was food, and it was warm, and it was all they had. "Rose, bring the children," Eleanor called softly. One by one, her children drank from the milk-soaked shawl, their small faces pressed against the wet wool, drinking the warm, sweet liquid that represented the only kindness they'd received that day. Even baby Alice nursed at Eleanor's breast with more contentment after Eleanor herself had drunk some of the milk, letting it replenish what her body could give her infant daughter. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that belied the coldness of the air, Eleanor made a decision. They couldn't stay on the road. They needed shelter, even if it was just a barn or an abandoned building. They needed to survive the night. "We keep walking," she told her children. "Just a little farther. We'll find somewhere safe. I promise." It was a promise she had no right to make, but she made it anyway. Because what else could a mother do when her children looked at her with such trust, such faith that she would somehow make everything right? They walked into the gathering dusk, a small procession of the discarded, 1 widow, 7 children, and 1 gentle cow. The cold deepened with the darkness, and Eleanor felt fear clawing at her throat, but she kept walking, kept Clover moving forward, kept her children close. She didn't know that 15 miles ahead, in the direction they were heading, stood an abandoned dairy farm. She didn't know that an old Scottish woman named Moira McGregor sat in a house on a hill, looking at the sunset and thinking about all she'd lost. She didn't know that Clover, her mother's beloved cow, would prove to be not a burden, but a blessing, the thread that would connect her to a future she couldn't yet imagine. All Eleanor knew, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky and her children's teeth began to chatter with cold, was that they had to survive this night, and somehow, impossibly, they would, because giving up wasn't an option. 7 pairs of eyes depended on her to find a way way forward. They found shelter that first night in an abandoned trapper's cabin, barely more than 4 walls and a partial roof, but it blocked the wind, and that was enough. Eleanor built a small fire from dead branches, her hands numb and clumsy with cold. The children huddled around it, their faces gaunt in the flickering light. She milked Clover again, this time into the cast iron pot, and they passed it around, each child taking careful sips of the warm milk that was their only supper. Rose, always the responsible one, didn't complain about her hunger. James tried to be brave, but couldn't stop his stomach from growling audibly. Little Samuel fell asleep mid-sip, exhausted beyond his body's ability to stay conscious. Eleanor held baby Alice close, feeling the infant's fragile heartbeat against her chest, and wondered how many more nights like this they could survive. The morning came gray and cold. Eleanor woke to find a frost on the inside of the cabin wall, and Grace shivering violently despite being wrapped in both blankets with her sibling. They needed to reach a town. They needed help. Pride was a luxury Eleanor could no longer afford. "We're going to Riverside," Eleanor announced as they prepared to leave. "It's a day's walk, maybe less if we move quickly. There will be people there. Someone will help us." She wasn't sure she believed it, but saying it aloud made it feel more possible. The walk to Riverside was brutal. The mud sucked at their shoes with every step. Little Henry had to be carried for the last 5 miles, his small legs simply giving out. Eleanor took turns with Rose carrying him, while James tried to help Lily, who was crying from exhaustion and hunger. Samuel trudged along in silence, still clutching his wooden horse, his face set in a determined grimace that broke Eleanor's heart. They reached Riverside just as the sun reached its zenith. The town was larger than Eleanor had expected, perhaps 200 souls, with a main street of wooden buildings, a church with a white steeple, and the blessed sight of shops and business. People stopped to stare as Eleanor and her children walked down the main street, a bedraggled procession that drew looks of pity, suspicion, and curiosity. Eleanor's first thought was to find the church. Surely a man of God would help a widow with children, but the church was locked, and the small house beside it showed no signs of life. A woman passing by, well-dressed and carrying a basket, shook her head when Eleanor asked about the pastor. "Reverend Williams is in Calgary for the week, helping with a new church building," the woman said, her eyes taking in Eleanor's worn dress and the children's thin faces. "You look like you've traveled far. Are you looking for someone?" "Work," Eleanor said, lifting her chin. "I'm looking for work. I can clean, cook, sew, anything honest." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Times are hard. Most families barely have enough for themselves." But she paused. "You might try the bakery. Samuel Hart runs it. He's a widower himself, sometimes takes on help during busy seasons." Eleanor thanked her and led her children down the street, following the woman's directions until they reached a small shop with a painted sign, "Hart's Bakery." The smell that wafted from the open door was intoxicating. Fresh bread, sweet pastries, the warm scent of yeast and sugar that made Eleanor's empty stomach clench painfully. She left the children outside with Rose in charge and entered the bakery. The interior was warm, blessedly warm, with ovens radiating heat and shelves lined with bread. An older man, perhaps 60, with white hair and flour dusting his apron, looked up from kneading dough. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was kind, with a slight German accent. "Mrs. Hayes," Eleanor corrected gently. "Eleanor Hayes, I'm looking for work, Mr. Hart. Any work. I can clean. I can help with the baking if you teach me. I have 7 children outside and her voice caught. "We need help." Samuel Hart's eyes widened slightly. He wiped his hands on his apron and came around the counter, moving to the door to look outside. Eleanor watched as he took in the sight of her 7 children, huddled together on the wooden walkway, their faces pinched with hunger and cold. 7 children, he said quietly. "And their father?" "Dead," Eleanor said. 6 months ago. Farm accident." Samuel was silent for a moment, his eyes moving from the children back to Eleanor. She could see him making a calculation, weighing compassion against practicality. Finally, he sighed. "I don't need help right now," he said, and Eleanor's heart sank. Business is slow in spring, but he held up a hand as Eleanor's face crumpled. "I'm not turning you away. Come inside, all of you. Bring that cow around to the back. There's a small shed there. Not much, but it's dry. Your children look like they could use a meal." Eleanor felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. "I can pay. I have—" She stopped. She had nothing. No money, no possessions worth trading, nothing but her pride, and pride didn't feed children. "You can pay by eating what I give you and not arguing about it," Samuel said firmly. "Bring your family inside. It's too cold for children to be standing about." The next hour was a blur of warmth and kindness that Eleanor had almost forgotten existed. Samuel brought out day-old bread, still good, just not fresh enough to sell, and a pot of soup that he claimed he'd made too much of. The children ate slowly at first, as if afraid the food would be snatched away, then with increasing enthusiasm as they realized no one was going to stop. Eleanor herself could barely eat, her throat tight with gratitude and the fear that this kindness would end as suddenly as it had appeared. She held baby Alice while Rose helped feed the younger one, and she watched Samuel Hart move around his bakery with the comfortable efficiency of a man who'd been doing this work for decades. "Your children are well behaved," Samuel observed, bringing Eleanor a cup of weak tea. "My Anna would have said that speaks well of their mother." "Anna was your wife?" Eleanor asked softly. 35 years, Samuel nodded. "Lost her to the fever 2 winters ago. No children of our own, which was our great sorrow. But she would have loved this." He gestured at at the children eating hungrily. This noise and chaos. She always said a house should be full of children. Eleanor felt the story behind his words, the loneliness that echoed through his kitchen. I'm sorry for your loss. And I for yours. Samuel sat down across from her, his kind eyes serious. Mrs. Hayes, I won't pry into your business, but you and your children need more than a meal. Where have you come from? Where are you going? Eleanor hesitated, then decided truth was all she had left to give. She told him about Thomas's death, about the debts, about her mother's marriage to Howard Blackwood and Howard's assault. She didn't sugarcoat it, didn't soften the shame of being cast out with accusations of immorality following her. Samuel listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. When Eleanor finished, he sat back and shook his head. Howard Blackwood, I know the name. He has business interests in Riverside too, owns land, lends money at rates that would make a banker blush. He looked at Eleanor with something like respect. You escaped him, Mrs. Hayes. That's no small thing. Many women in your position would have accepted his term for the sake of the children. I would rather die, Eleanor said flatly, and I would rather my children see me struggle with integrity than thrive through shame. Good, Samuel said. Good. Then we'll figure out how to help you thrive through honest work instead. He offered them the storage room behind the bakery for the night. It wasn't much, just a space where he kept sacks of flour and sugar, but it was warm and dry and safe. Eleanor settled her children there, all 7 of them curled together on flour sacks like a litter of puppies seeking warmth. Clover was in the shed outside, contentedly eating hay that Samuel had provided. Tomorrow, Samuel said as he prepared to close the bakery for the night, you'll need to think about your next step. Riverside is small. People talk. If Howard has business here, his version of events may reach us eventually. You need to establish yourself somewhere, build a reputation that can't be undone by his lie. Where, Mama? Eleanor asked helplessly. I have no money, no references, nothing but 7 hungry mouths and 1 cow. Samuel stroked his beard thoughtfully. There's a woman lives about 3 miles north of here, Scottish, name's Moira McGregor. She's prickly, lost her husband and son in a flood 15 years ago. Keeps to herself mostly, but he paused. She has an old dairy on her property, been abandoned since her family died. She's too old to work it herself and too stubborn to sell it or let anyone else use it. Eleanor's heart began to beat fast. A dairy? Aye, the Haven, she calls it. Fancy name for what's basically a crumbling building and some old equipment. But the structure is sound. The spring that fed the operation still runs clean. And he looked at Eleanor carefully. If you know anything about dairy work, about making cheese or butter, it could be a start. If Moira would let you use it. My mother taught me, Eleanor said, memories flooding back. Before she married Howard, before everything changed, she made the most beautiful cheese. Hard cheese that would age for months. Soft, fresh cheese that melted on your tongue. I helped her from the time I was Rose's age. I know the craft. Samuel nodded slowly. Then tomorrow we'll see about introducing you to Moira McGregor. I'll warn you, she's not easy. Grief made her hard and loneliness made her bitter. But underneath all that, he trailed off, then shrugged. Underneath all that, she's still the woman who once had the most prosperous dairy in 3 counties. Maybe seeing her life's work sitting empty and useless bothers her more than she admits. That night, Eleanor lay awake in the storage room, listening to her children's steady breathing. Rose was curled around baby Alice, protective even in sleep. James had his arm over Samuel, and the 3 youngest ones were tangled together in a knot of small limbs. They were safe for now, fed for now, warm for now. But tomorrow would come, and with it, new challenge. Eleanor thought about Moira McGregor, the hard Scottish woman with the abandoned dairy. She thought about Clover, her mother's legacy, and the knowledge Catherine had passed down about turning milk into something valuable. A dairy, a place to work, to build something. It wasn't much of a dream, certainly not the future she'd imagined when she married Thomas and thought about raising their children on their own prosperous farm. But it was something, a possibility, a thread of hope. Eleanor pulled out the photograph of Thomas, looking at his face in the dim light that filtered through the window. He'd been a good man, a kind husband, a loving father. His death had been sudden and brutal, caught in the thresher mechanisms, gone before anyone could save him. She'd been numb for weeks afterward, functioning only because her children needed her. I'm trying, she whispered to the photograph. I'm trying to take care of them, to give them a future. I hope you'd be proud. The photograph, of course, said nothing, but holding it gave her strength, reminded her that she'd loved and been loved, that she was more than Howard Blackwood's lies made her out. The next morning, Samuel provided them with a simple breakfast of bread and milk. Eleanor milked dairy Clover again, adding to their supplies, and was surprised by how much the cow produced. Clover was clearly well-bred, a Jersey of good stock, and Eleanor began to see what her mother had valued so much. Not just a pet, but an asset. Ready? Samuel asked, pulling on his coat. It was Sunday, and the bakery would be closed. I'll walk with you to Moira's place. Fair warning. Don't be discouraged if she sends you away the first time or the second. Persistence is key with her. Eleanor gathered her children, straightened her dress as much as she could, and took Clover's rope. Samuel led them out of Riverside along a muddy track that wound north through greening fields. The April sun was warmer today, promising the spring that was still struggling to arrive. After about an hour's walk, Samuel pointed ahead. There, that's the McGregor property. Eleanor looked and felt her breath catch. On a gentle rise of land sat a small stone house, well built and solid despite obvious obvious neglect. Behind it, she could see the outline of a larger building, wooden with a sagging roof but still standing. Corrals and fences, some broken and some intact, stretched across the property, and everywhere the signs of abandonment. Overgrown grass, broken equipment, the melancholy air of a place that had once lived but now only waited. The building behind the house is the dairy, Samuel said quietly. Moira's husband built it himself, designed it to stay cool in summer and insulated in winter. It was a marvel in its day. Now it's just empty. As they approached, a figure emerged from the stone house. A woman, small and thin, with white hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that could have been carved from the same stone as her house. She held a walking stick, but Eleanor suspected it was less for support and more as a potential weapon. "Samuel Hart," the woman called, her voice carrying a thick Scottish burr. "What brings you to my door with a parade of strangers?" "Good morning, Moira," Samuel called back, unperturbed by her tone. "Brought someone to meet you. This is Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. She's new to Riverside and looking for work." Moira's sharp eyes raked over Eleanor and the children, missing nothing. Not their threadbare clothes, not their thin faces, not the cow that Eleanor held. "Work," Moira repeated flatly. "And what work could I possibly have for a woman with," she counted quickly, "7 children and a cow? Do I look like I run an orphanage?" Eleanor stepped forward, her chin up despite her nervousness. "No, ma'am, but Samuel tells me you have a dairy, an empty dairy. I know the craft. I had learned from my mother. I can make cheese, butter, any dairy product you can name. I have my own cow. I need only a place to work and a roof for my children." "My dairy is none of your business," Moira snapped. "And I don't need charity cases cluttering up my property." "I'm not asking for charity," Eleanor said firmly. "I'm offering a partnership. I work, I produce, we share the profits. Your dairy come back to life. My children are fed and housed. Everyone benefits." Moira's eyes narrowed. "You think it's that simple? You think you can just walk onto my land and start making cheese?" "No," Eleanor admitted. "I think it will be hard work. I think the dairy probably needs repairs. I think it will take time to build up production and find customers. But I also think," she looked directly at Moira, "that leaving that building empty doesn't honor whoever built it, doesn't honor the work that went into it." Something flickered in Moira's face, pain perhaps, or recognition. She looked at Eleanor for a long moment, then at the children standing quietly behind their mother, then at the cow. "That's a good Jersey," Moira said finally. "Good line. Gives rich milk, I'd wager." "She does," Eleanor confirmed. "My mother's cow. Her name is Clover." Another long silence. Then Moira sighed, a sound like wind through dead grass. "The dairy is a wreck," she said. "Hasn't been used in 15 years. Equipment's rusted, mice have nested in everything, roof probably leaks. You'd be spending more time cleaning than working, at least at first." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Eleanor said. Moira looked at her hard. "And if I say no? If I tell you to take your cow and your children and go find some other desperate woman to prey on?" Eleanor felt the weight of her children's eyes on her back, felt the responsibility of their lives in her hands. "Then I'll thank you for your time and keep looking. But I hope you won't say no. I hope," her voice softened, "I hope you'll give us a chance." Moira stared at her. Then surprisingly, her lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You've got spine, girl. I'll give you that. Most people don't stand up to me twice in one conversation." She turned and started walking toward her house. "Come on then. Let's see if you can back up your words with work. Samuel, you can go. I don't need you hovering." Samuel caught Eleanor's eye and gave her an encouraging nod before turning back toward town. Eleanor gathered her children and followed Moira McGregor toward an uncertain future that suddenly seemed just a little bit brighter. Moira McGregor's stone house was sparse and immaculately clean, as if the old woman spent her days scrubbing away memories along with the dust. She gestured for Eleanor and the children to sit at a long wooden table that looked hand-hewn, solid enough to last another century. The children perched nervously on the bench, their eyes wide and watchful. "I'll make tea," Moira announced, more statement than offer. She moved to the wood stove with surprising agility for a woman her age, her movements economical and precise. "You children, there's bread in that tin on the counter. Not fresh, but it'll fill your belly. Take what you need." Rose looked at Eleanor for permission. Eleanor nodded, and the older children helped the younger ones to the bread, sharing it carefully, making sure everyone got an equal portion. Moira watched this from the corner of her eye as she prepared the tea, and Eleanor saw something soften in her expression before the hardness returned. "Your mother taught you manners, at least," Moira said, setting a teapot on the table along with mismatched cup. "More than can be said for most children these days. Wild as rabbits, a lot of them. My mother taught me many things," Eleanor said quietly. "Manner, cheesemaking, and that a woman's worth isn't determined by whether she has a man to speak for her." Moira's sharp eyes fixed on Eleanor. "Trouble with men, is it? I thought as much. Samuel's too kind to say, but I can read between the lines. No woman travels with 7 children and nothing but a cow unless she's running from something." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "Running from someone. My stepfather. He tried to," she glanced at her children, modified her own words. "He made advances. I refused. Then he cast me out and spread lies about my character to justify it." "Bastard," Moira said flatly, and several of the children gasped at the profanity. The old woman didn't apologize. "Men like that are a plague. My own brothers-in-law tried to take this property from me when Angus and Hamish died. Said a woman couldn't manage it alone. I showed them different with a shotgun and a lawyer from Calgary. She poured tea for Eleanor and herself, studying the younger woman over the rim of her cup. So you think you can make cheese? Lots of women think they can make cheese. Most of them make swill that's only fit for hog. My mother's cheese won prizes at the county fair in Ontario, Eleanor said. Before we came west, she taught me her method, the temperature, the timing, the aging. I was making cheese alongside her from the time I was 12 years old. Ontario methods don't always work in Saskatchewan, Moira countered. Different climate, different milk. You have to adapt. Then I'll adapt, Eleanor said simply. What choice do I have? Moira's mouth twitched again in that not quite smile. What choice indeed? She stood abruptly. Come, I'll show you what you're so eager to take on. But I warn you, it's worse than you think. Eleanor left Rose in charge of the children with instructions to stay inside and be good. Then she followed Moira out the back door, across a yard of overgrown grass and crumbling stone pathways, toward the building she'd seen from the road. The dairy was larger than Eleanor had expected, perhaps 40 feet long and 30 wide, built of wood that had weathered to silvery gray. The roof sagged in the middle but held. Windows, once glass, were now mostly broken or covered with board. The door hung crooked on its hinge. Angus built this in 1835, Moira said, her voice softer now, tinged with something that might have been pride or pain or both. 20 years before we lost everything. He designed it himself. Used to say it was his cathedral. The spring runs underneath. You can hear it if you listen. Kept everything cool year-round, better than any ice house. She pushed open the door, which protested with a shriek of rusty hinges. Daylight filtered through gaps in the roof and broken windows, illuminating a space that was both magnificent and heartbreaking. The main room was large, with a high ceiling supported by massive beams. Along one wall stood a row of wooden shelves, empty now and covered in dust and mousedrop. Workbenches lined another wall, their surfaces scarred and stained from years of use. In the center of the room sat what must have once been the pride of the operation, a large copper cheese kettle, perhaps 4 feet across, resting on a brick hearth. The copper was green with verdigris, but the shape was still perfect. That kettle came from Scotland, Moira said, running her hand along its rim. Angus's grandfather used it before him, said it made the finest cheese in Aberdeen. We brought it across the ocean, across the plains, thought we'd use it forever. Her voice cracked slightly. Forever's not as long as you think when you're young. Eleanor walked through the space, her practiced eye assessing the damage and the potential simultaneously. The floor was solid stone, surprisingly level and intact. The hearth was salvageable. It would need cleaning and probably new mortar, but the structure was sound. The shelves could be repaired or replaced. The real treasure was the spring Moira had mentioned. Eleanor could indeed hear it, a constant whisper of running water from beneath the floor. There's a channel system, Moira explained, following Eleanor's gaze. Angus diverted the spring to run beneath the dairy and then back out to rejoin the creek. Keeps the temperature constant, cool in summer, above freezing in winter. The aging room, she pointed to a door at the far end, is built right over the deepest part of the channel. We could age cheese there for 6 months, a year even, and it would stay perfect. Eleanor opened the door to the aging room and found herself in a smaller chamber, perhaps 15 by 20 feet, with stone walls and more wooden shelving. Despite years of abandonment, the air was noticeably cooler here, and she could hear the spring more clearly, almost directly beneath her feet. This is remarkable, Eleanor breathed. Moira, this could work. This could really work. Could work, Moira repeated. If you can clean 15 years of neglect, if you can repair the equipment, if you can actually make cheese worth selling, if you can find customers who'll pay for it. That's a lot of ifs, girl. Eleanor turned to face her. I know, but every journey starts with the first step, doesn't it? My mother used to say that. Even if you can't see the whole path, you can see the next step. And the next step is cleaning this place. Moira studied her for a long moment. You'll need tools, brushes, lye soap, vinegar for the copper. I have those. You'll need to repair the roof. I saw 3 places where the light's coming through. You'll need proper molds for the cheese, proper aging racks. The ones we had rotted or were taken by scavengers years ago. One step at a time, Eleanor said. First, we clean, then we repair, then we make cheese, and then she paused. Then we see if anyone wants to buy it. And where will you live while doing all this miraculous work? Moira asked. That shed Samuel mentioned, the one where your cow is staying, it's barely fit for animals, let alone 7 children. Eleanor's hope dimmed slightly. She hadn't thought that far ahead, had been so focused on the possibility of work that she'd forgotten the practical reality of shelter. Moira sighed, a sound of exasperation and something else. Perhaps resignation, perhaps acceptance. There's a loft above the dairy, originally meant for storage, but Angus built it solid. It's got a wood stove, a proper chimney. We used to use it in the coldest winters when we needed to watch the cheese around the clock, keep the fires going. It's dusty and needs airing out, but it's weatherproof and warm. You can stay there, you and all your brood. Eleanor felt tears threatening again and blinked them back fiercely. Thank you. I don't know how to repay such kindness. Repay it by making this place live again, Moira said gruffly. By proving that my Angus's work wasn't for nothing. That's payment enough. She turned toward the door, then paused. And Eleanor, the term, you use my dairy, my spring, my land. In exchange, half of everything you produce is mine. First 6 months, we reassess after that based on how things are going. Fair. More than fair, Eleanor said quickly. Thank you, Moira. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Moira warned. You haven't seen the extent of the work, and you haven't met winter in Saskatchewan. But she almost smiled. You've got spine. I respect that. We'll see how much spine you have left after a week of scrubbing mouse dropping. The next 3 days were a blur of exhausting, filthy, backbreaking work. Eleanor and Rose attacked the dairy with brushes, buckets, and determination. Moira provided cleaning supplies, and though she claimed to be too old for such labor, somehow managed to appear regularly with advice, tools, or, surprisingly, food for the children. James proved useful at repairs, his young hands nimble with hammer and nails as he helped Eleanor patch the worst of the roof hole. Even little Samuel contributed, carrying small loads of debris to the burn pile they'd established in the yard. Lily and Grace swept endlessly, their small brooms raising clouds of dust that made everyone cough. The loft above the dairy became their home. It was a single large room with a sloped ceiling, a wood stove at one end, and windows that looked out over Moira's property. Eleanor scrubbed it clean and arranged their few possessions, the blankets, the cast iron pot, the photograph of Thomas. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and it was warm, and most importantly, no one was going to throw them out of it. Clover settled into a small corral near the dairy, content with the spring grass and the regular milking schedule Eleanor established. The cow's production was remarkable, nearly 4 gallons of some rich Jersey milk with a high butterfat content perfect for cheese making. On the 4th day, Eleanor felt ready to tackle the copper kettle. She'd mixed a paste of salt, butchered and floured, and spent hours scrubbing the verdigris away. Slowly, painstakingly, the green gave way to the warm glow of copper underneath. By evening, her arms ached and her hands were raw, but the kettle gleamed in the firelight, magnificent and ready. Moira came to inspect the progress that evening. She stood in the doorway of the dairy, which now smelled of soap and vinegar instead of decay and abandonment, and looked around with eyes that shone suspiciously bright. It looks, she started, then stopped. It looks like it did when Angus was alive, when Hamish was learning the craft. Her voice was rough. I haven't been in here properly in 15 years. Couldn't bear to. But now it's ready to make cheese again, Eleanor said gently. If you'll teach me your method. My mother's recipes were good, but you know this climate, this water, this land. I need your knowledge more. The old woman nodded slowly. Tomorrow I'll teach you. We'll make a test batch, just a small one, from one milking. If it works, if the spring still keeps the temperature right, if the aging room still functions, then we'll know. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. She lay in the loft, listening to her children's steady breathing, and thought about tomorrow. Making cheese again, using her mother's skill, her mother's gift. Catherine had died thinking Eleanor's life was settled, secure with Thomas on their own farm. She'd never known about the debts, the accident, the desperate flight from Howard Blackwood. I wish you could see this, Mama, Eleanor whispered to the darkness. I wish you could see Clover and this beautiful dairy and know that your teaching wasn't wasted, that I'm going to make something good here, something that matters. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect cheese-making weather. Moira arrived at the dairy just after sunrise, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. She set it on the workbench and uncovered it to reveal several items. Cheese molds made of wood and woven willow, a long knife with a curved blade, several squares of cheesecloth, and something wrapped in oiled paper. Starter culture, Moira explained, unwrapping the paper to reveal a crumbly, yellowish substance. Kept it alive all these years in my root cellar, from the original batch Angus brought from Scotland. It's what gives our cheese its particular character. Without it, you're just making farmer's cheese. With it, she smiled, you're making Haven Dairy cheese. Eleanor felt the weight of what Moira was offering. Not just knowledge, but legacy. The continuation of something precious that had been interrupted but not destroyed. I'll honor it, Eleanor promised. I'll make you proud. Make Angus proud, Moira corrected. I'm just the keeper of his memory. They began the process. Eleanor milked Clover while Moira repaired the kettle, building a careful fire beneath it, testing the temperature with her hand. Rose brought the milk to the dairy in buckets, and Eleanor poured it through cheesecloth to strain any impurity. 40 gallons to make 10-pound cheese, Moira instructed. But we're only using 10 this first time. Don't want to waste good milk on a test batch. Watch the temperature. Needs to be blood warm, no hotter. Too hot and you kill the culture. Too cold and it won't work. Eleanor watched carefully as Moira added the starter culture, mixing it into the warmed milk with slow, deliberate strokes. Then came the rennet, which would cause the milk to separate into curds and whey. They covered the kettle and waited. 45 minutes by Moira's count, timed by some internal clock that Eleanor envied. When they uncovered the kettle, the milk had transformed. What had been liquid was now a solid mass, quivering slightly when Moira poked it. Perfect set, Moira pronounced. Now we cut. She handed Eleanor the long knife and guided her hand, showing her how to cut the curd into uniform cube, a cross-hatch pattern that required precision and patience. The whey began to separate immediately, a greenish liquid pooling around the white curd cube. They worked together for the next 3 hours, stirring, heating, testing, draining. Moira's instructions were precise, delivered in a matter-of-fact tone that somehow made the complex process feel manageable. Eleanor found herself falling into a rhythm, her hands remembering movements her mother had taught her years ago, adapted now to Moira's methods. Finally, the curds were ready for pressing. Moira showed Eleanor how to pack them into the wooden molds, applying weight gradually to squeeze out the remaining whey and form the cheese into rounds. They used stones as weights, carefully balanced to apply even pressure. "Now we wait," Moira said. 24 hours in the press. Then we salt it, wrap it in cloth, and move it to the aging room. 30 days minimum before it's ready to eat. 60 days is better. 90 days is best. Eleanor looked at the pressed cheese, already taking shape in its mold. It didn't look like much, just white blocks of curd, but she could imagine what it would become, could almost taste the sharp, complex flavor that good cheese developed with time. "What if no one buys it?" Eleanor asked quietly. "What if we make all this cheese and no one wants it?" Moira snorted. "Then we eat it ourselves, and at least we won't starve. But people will want it. Good cheese always finds buyers. You just have to let them taste it first. Let them understand they're not buying any ordinary cheese. They're buying something made with skill and time and care, something worth paying." That evening, as Eleanor tucked her children into their beds in the loft, Rose asked, "Mama, are we going to be all right? Are we going to stay here?" Eleanor smoothed her daughter's hair back from her forehead. "I think so, sweetheart. I think we found our place. It's not what I imagined, not our own farm like your papa wanted, but it's good work, honest work. And Moira," she paused, "Moira is teaching me things your grandmother would have wanted me to know. We're building something here, something that will last." "I'm glad," Rose whispered. "I like it here." Moira's grumpy, but she's kind, like a grandmother almost. Eleanor thought about that. Moira had lost her son. Eleanor had lost her mother. Perhaps they were filling spaces in each other's lives that had been empty too long. It wasn't the family Eleanor had been born into or married into, but perhaps it was the family she was meant to find. 3 days later, they unmolded the cheese. Eleanor held her breath as Moira examined it, turning the small round in her hand, pressing it gently, smelling it, finally tasting a tiny corner. "Well?" Eleanor asked anxiously. Moira chewed slowly, thoughtfully. Then she nodded. "It's good, very good. The culture took well. The texture is right. With proper aging, this will be excellent cheese." Eleanor felt pride surge through her, warm and bright. They had done it. She had done it. But as the days passed and the reality of their situation settled in, Eleanor began to realize that making good cheese was only the first challenge. Now they had to survive while they waited for it to age. 30 days minimum. 30 days of feeding 7 children, of hoping Moira's generosity would last, of praying that Howard Blackwood wouldn't somehow find them and drag them back into his orbit. The future was uncertain, as it always was. But for the first time since Thomas died, Eleanor felt she had more than hope. She had skill, she had a place to work, and she had an unlikely ally in a stubborn Scottish woman who'd given her a second chance. It would have to be enough. The 30 days of waiting were the longest of Eleanor's life. Each morning, she woke in the loft above the dairy, milked Clover, and made more cheese, building their inventory for the day when they could finally sell. Each batch was an act of faith, an investment in a future she couldn't quite see, but desperately needed to believe in. Moira proved to be more than just a teacher. She became their unexpected lifeline. She brought vegetables from her root cellar, claiming they would rot if not used. She appeared with eggs from her chickens, insisting she couldn't eat them all herself. Once, she arrived with a haunch of smoked venison, saying tersely that a hunter had traded it for some work she'd done, and she was too old to chew tough meat. Eleanor knew charity when she saw it, but she also knew pride, and she suspected Moira did too. So she accepted the food with grace and repaid it the only way she could, with labor. She repaired Moira's sagging porch. James fixed the broken gate to her chicken coop. Rose helped with the endless mending that accumulated in a household. Even the younger children contributed, gathering kindling, pulling weeds from Moira's kitchen garden. "We're not charity cases," Eleanor told Moira one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sun set over the prairie. "No, you're not," Moira agreed. "You're workers. Good work. And good workers deserve fair wages, even if those wages come in the form of eggs and vegetables." The cheese aged in the cool darkness of the aging room, developing slowly, the cultures working their invisible magic. Eleanor checked them daily, turning them, monitoring their progress with the careful attention Moira had taught her. Some wheels developed the proper rind, a thin, protective coating that spoke of good condition. Others needed adjustment, and Eleanor learned to read the subtle signs of temperature and humidity, making small changes that would impact the final product. On the 28th day, Moira declared one of the early wheels ready for testing. They cut into it together, the knife sliding through the firm paste to reveal an interior that was pale gold, smooth with a few small eyes, air pockets that showed proper fermentation. Moira tasted it first, chewing slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she handed a piece to Ellen. The flavor was complex, sharp but not harsh, with a nutty undertone and a long, satisfying finish. It was good, better than good. It was exactly what Eleanor had hoped to create. "We're ready," Moira said simply. "Tomorrow is market day in Riverside. Time to see if people agree with us." Eleanor barely slept that night. She lay awake making plans, running through possibilities, rehearsing what she would say to potential customers. Rose, sensing her mother's anxiety, whispered across the darkness, "It's going to work, Mama. The cheese is wonderful. People will see that." "I hope so, sweetheart," Eleanor whispered back. "I hope so." The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect May day with the promise of warmth in the air, and the prairie alive with new grass and wild wildflower. Eleanor dressed carefully in her best dress, which was still worn and patched but clean. She brushed Rose's hair until it shone and made sure all the children looked as presentable as possible. They loaded their cheese into a wooden box that Moira provided. 6 small wheels, each one representing days of work and hope. Samuel Hart had agreed to let them use a corner of the area where local farmers sold their goods, a gesture of kindness that Eleanor knew she could never fully repay. Moira insisted on coming along, claiming she needed supplies from town anyway. But Eleanor suspected the old woman wanted to be there for moral support. They made an unlikely procession. Eleanor pushing a small cart that Moira had produced from somewhere, the children walking alongside, and Moira stumping along with her walking stick, fierce-eyed and protective as a mother hawk. The market area in Riverside was already bustling when they arrived. Farmers displayed spring vegetables, early lettuce, radishes, green onions. A man sold fresh-caught fish from the creek. A woman offered egg and live chicken. And in the corner, Samuel had indicated, Eleanor set up her small display. She had nothing fancy, just the wooden box, the 6 wheels of cheese arranged on a clean cloth, and a small sign that Rose had helped her make. Haven Dairy, artisan cheese. For the first hour, people passed by with barely a glance. Eleanor's heart sank lower with each person who walked past without stopping. Then a woman paused, perhaps drawn by curiosity about the new vendor. Cheese? The woman asked, eyeing the wheels skeptically. What kind? Aged cheddar style, Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. Made with Jersey milk in traditional methods. Aged 30 days for optimal flavor. Can I taste it? The woman asked. Eleanor had anticipated this. She'd brought a knife and had cut one wheel into small samples. She offered a piece to the woman, who took it cautiously as if expecting it to bite her back. The woman chewed, her expression thoughtful. Then her eyebrows rose. That's good. That's really good. How much? Eleanor's mind raced. She and Moira had discussed pricing, but now, faced with an actual customer, she second-guessed herself. Too high and no one would buy. Too low and people would think it was poor quality. 50 cents for a half wheel, Eleanor said, hoping her voice didn't shake. 90 cents for a full wheel. The woman considered, then nodded. I'll take a full wheel. My husband loves good cheese, and we haven't had anything decent since we left Ontario. Eleanor's hands trembled as she wrapped the cheese in paper and collected the coin. 90 cents. Her first sale. It was barely enough to buy flour for a week, but it represented so much more than money. It was validation, proof that what she was creating had value. The woman walked away with her purchase, and Eleanor watched her go, hardly daring to believe it had actually happened. Then the woman stopped at another stall, spoke to someone, and gestured back toward Eleanor's table. Within minutes, 3 more people approached. They'd heard about the cheese, wanted to taste it. Eleanor gave out samples, answered questions about her methods, explained the aging process. One man, a merchant from Calgary who was in Riverside on business, tasted her cheese and immediately bought 2 full wheels. This is excellent quality, he said, counting out coins. Are you able to produce more? I have a shop in Calgary that specializes in fine goods. I could sell a dozen wheels a week easily, maybe more. Eleanor's breath hot. A dozen wheels a week? That would require, she did quick mental calculations, at least 60 gallons of milk per week, possibly more. Clover alone couldn't produce that much. They would need more cow, more milk. Yes, Eleanor said, deciding to worry about the logistics later. Yes, I can produce more. It would take time to scale up production, but I can do it. The merchant, whose name was Mr. Thornton, handed her his card. Lois, no, excellent. Send word when you are ready to fill a larger order. I'll pay fair prices for quality goods. By mid-afternoon, Eleanor had sold all 6 wheels and had taken orders for 16 more. She had nearly $5 in her pocket, more money than she'd held at once since Thomas died. Her hands shook as she counted the coins again and again, making sure it was real. Moira, who'd been watching from a distance, approached with something that might have been approval in her eyes. Well, seems people have sense after all. They know good cheese when they taste it. Eleanor felt tears threatening. Moira, we did it. We actually did it. You did it, Moira corrected. Your skill, your work. I just provided the space. You provided more than that, Eleanor said softly. You provided hope and knowledge. And she hesitated. And family, when I had none. Moira looked away quickly, but not before Eleanor saw the emotion in her face. Well, don't get maudlin. We have work to do. If you're going to fill all these orders, you'll need more milk. 1 cow won't be enough. They walked back to Moira's property in the late afternoon sun, the children chattering excitedly about the day. Rose carried baby Alice, who had slept through most of the market day. James walked alongside Eleanor, mature beyond his 8 years, asking thoughtful questions about how they would manage increased production. We need more cows, Eleanor said, but good dairy cows cost money we don't have. Yet, Moira said, you don't have it yet, but you made $5 today. Next market day, you'll make more. You save every penny you can, and within a few months, you'll have enough for a second cow, maybe a third. Months, Eleanor repeated, but Mr. Thornton wants a dozen wheels a week. Then you tell Mr. Thornton you're building your herd and your production will increase gradually, Moira said firmly. Any sensible businessman understands that quality takes time, and if he doesn't, she shrugged, then he's not worth working with anyway. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor fell into a rhythm that was exhausting but satisfying. She made cheese 3 times a week using every drop of milk that Clover produced. She sold at the market every week, building a loyal customer base. Samuel Hart became her first regular regular customer, buying cheese for his bakery to serve with bread. Agnes Campbell, a kind woman who sold vegetables at the market, became a friend and advocate, telling everyone who would listen about the wonderful cheese from Haven Dairy. Eleanor saved every penny she could. She kept her money in a tin box hidden in the loft, and she counted it obsessively, watching the total grow with painful slowness. $15, $20, $25. She needed at least $40 for a decent dairy cow, possibly more if she wanted one as good as Clover. The children thrived. With regular food between Moira's vegetables, the milk from Clover, and the occasional meat or fish that Eleanor could now afford to buy, they began to fill out, their faces losing that pinched, hungry look. Rose grew taller, more confident, taking on responsibilities in the dairy and proving herself to be a skilled cheesemaker in her own right. James showed an aptitude for fixing things, keeping the dairy equipment running smoothly. Even little Samuel, now 5 years old, had his job, feeding the chickens that Moira had mysteriously acquired and installed in a coop near the dairy. For the children, Moira had said gruffly when Eleanor protested the gift. Children need eggs, and the chickens needed a home. It's practical, not charity. Eleanor had learned not to argue with Moira's particular brand of stubborn kindness. One evening in late June, as Eleanor was counting her money for perhaps the 100th time, Moira appeared at the dairy with news. "There's a farmer selling off his herd," she said without preamble. "Getting old, moving to live with his daughter in the city. He's got 3 Jersey cows, good bloodlines, healthy animals. Wants $45 each, or $120 for all 3. Eleanor's heart leapt and sank simultaneously. "I have $38. I'm close, but not close enough for even one." Moira fixed her with a steady look. "I have money, savings from before everything. I'll loan you what you need. You pay me back from cheese sales, no interest, no rush. We're partners, aren't we?" "Moira, I can't." "You can and you will," Moira interrupted, "because those cows won't wait for you to save another $10, and opportunities like this don't come around often. We buy all 3, we triple our milk production immediately, and we start really building this business." Eleanor felt the weight of the decision. Taking on debt, even to a friend, was frightening, but Moira was right. This was an opportunity they couldn't afford to miss. "All right," Eleanor said finally, "but I'm paying you back every penny, with interest, whether you want it or not." "Stubborn woman," Moira muttered, but she was smiling. 2 days later, Eleanor and Moira rode in a borrowed wagon to the farm 15 miles north. The farmer, a weathered man named Henry Walsh, showed them his cows with obvious affection. The 3 Jerseys were beautiful, gentle-eyed and well cared for, clearly used to human handling. "They're good girls," Mr. Walsh said, patting the largest one. "This here's Buttercup. She's the lead cow. The other 2 follow her. That's Daisy, and the younger one is Primrose. All in good health, all good producers. Been with me for years," but his voice caught slightly. "I can't take them to the city. Need to know they're going to someone who'll treat them right." Eleanor met his eyes. "I promise you, Mr. Walsh, they'll be loved and well cared for. My daughter Rose is already teaching my younger children that animals deserve respect and kindness. Your cows will have good lives with us." Mr. Walsh nodded, satisfied. They made the exchange, Eleanor's carefully saved money plus Moira's loan, and led the 3 cows back to Haven Dairy in a slow, careful procession that took most of the day. The children were ecstatic. They'd been told about the cows, but seeing them arrive was different, real and magnificent, and somehow transformative. Suddenly, their small operation felt like a real dairy, a real business. That evening, Eleanor milked all 4 cows for the first time, Clover and her 3 new companions. The amount of milk was staggering, nearly 15 gallons. She stood in the dairy, looking at the full buckets, and felt tears of gratitude streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "to God, to her mother's memory, to Moira, to the universe that had somehow guided her to this place in this moment. Thank you." Moira, who'd come to check on the new arrivals, found Eleanor crying in the dairy and simply handed her a handkerchief. "None of that now. You've got work to do. 15 gallons doesn't turn itself into cheese." But Eleanor saw the understanding in Moira's eyes, the recognition of what this moment meant. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were building something real and lasting and good. That night, as Eleanor tucked her children into bed in the loft, Rose asked, "Mama, are we rich now with 4 cows?" Eleanor laughed softly. "No, sweetheart, we're not rich. We're still paying off the loan for the new cows, but we're going to be all right. Better than all right. We're going to build something here. Something that will last, that will take care of us. Papa would be proud," Rose said softly. Eleanor thought about Thomas, about the dreams they'd had for their children. Those dreams had died with him in that terrible accident. But new dreams had been born. Different dreams, but no less valuable. "Yes," Eleanor said, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Yes, I think he would be." She lay awake long after the children slept, listening to their breathing, feeling the warmth of their bodies around her. 4 cows, a dairy, a business, a future. It wasn't what she'd imagined, but it was good. It was honest. It was hers. And somewhere in Willowbrook, Howard Blackwood had no idea that the woman he'd cast out had not only survived, but was beginning to thrive. The woman he'd tried to shame and destroy was making a name for herself, building a reputation for quality and integrity that would soon spread far beyond the small market in Riverside. Eleanor smiled in the darkness. Revenge wasn't why she worked so hard, wasn't what drove her, but there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that she'd taken what Howard meant as a curse. Being cast out up with nothing but a cow and transformed it into a blessing. The best revenge, Eleanor thought, wasn't revenge at all. It was simply living well. Chapter 5. The Devil's Return. 3 months passed in a blur of work and steady growth. By late August, Haven Dairy was producing 40 wheels of cheese per week, with customers as far away as Calgary and Medicine Hat. Eleanor had repaid half of Moira's loan and had even managed to save a small emergency fund. The children were healthy, happy, and helping with the dairy work according to their ages and abilities. Rose, now 11, could make cheese almost as well as Eleanor herself. James had become an expert at maintaining the equipment and managing the cow. Life had settled into something Eleanor had almost forgotten was possible. Routine contentment. Not perfect, not without worries, but good, solid, safe. She should have known it wouldn't last. It was a market day in mid-August, hot and humid with the promise of afternoon thunderstorm. Eleanor had set up her usual stall, her cheese display, now more professional with a proper table and cloth, a hand-painted sign that James had crafted, and regular customers who came specifically to buy from her. Agnes Campbell's vegetable stall was nearby, and Samuel Hart had made a point of bringing some of his bread to sell alongside Eleanor's cheese, creating an informal partnership that benefited both of them. Eleanor was wrapping a purchase for Mrs. Henderson, one of her regular customers, when she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. Well, well, if it isn't my dear stepdaughter. She looked up slowly, knowing what she would see, but hoping desperately that she was wrong. But there he stood, Howard Blackwood, dressed in his finest suit, flanked by 2 rough-looking men Eleanor didn't recognize. His face wore an expression of triumph mixed with malice that made her stomach turn. Mr. Blackwood, Eleanor said quietly, forcing her voice to remain steady. I'm conducting business. Please move along. Business? Howard's laugh was loud, designed to draw attention. People at nearby stalls turned to look. Is that what you call it? I call it fraud. Theft. You see, good people of Riverside, he raised his voice, addressing the small crowd that was gathering. This woman stole from me, ran off with my property, a valuable Jersey cow, and now she's profiting from the milk that rightfully belongs to me. Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Around her, she saw confusion on familiar faces. Mrs. Henderson stepped back slightly, doubt creeping into her expression. Even Agnes looked uncertain. That's a lie, Eleanor said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ear. Clover was my mother's cow. You gave her to me when you forced me to leave. Forced you? Howard's expression was a masterpiece of wounded innocence. I took you in, Eleanor, a widow with 7 children and no prospects. I fed you, housed you, asked for nothing in return. And how did you repay my Christian charity? You made advances toward me, inappropriate advances, and when I rejected them, you stole my livestock and fled in the night. I've been searching for you for months. The crowd murmured. Eleanor could see the calculation in people's eyes. A respectable man in a fine suit versus a desperate widow. She knew how this looked, knew that Howard's version of events was far more believable than her truth. You're lying, she said louder now, desperation making her bold. You came to my room. You tried to force yourself on me. I defended myself, and you threw me out to cover your shame. Clover was my mother's cow, Catherine's cow, and you gave her to me because you thought 1 cow and 7 children would equal my death in the wilderness. You wanted me gone in silence. Quite an imagination, Howard said smoothly. Tell me, good people, does this sound like the behavior of a godly man or the desperate lies of a thief? He pulled papers from his pocket. I have here the bill of sale for that Jersey cow purchased by me in 1853. I have witnesses who saw her steal away in the night. You have nothing but lies. A new voice cut through the crowd. Moira McGregor pushed her way forward, her walking stick clearing a path, her face fierce. I know this woman. She came to me with nothing but a bow and 7 starving children, and she's worked every day since to build an honest business. And I know you, Howard Blackwood. Know your reputation for lending money at criminal rate, for taking advantage of desperate people. You've got no power here. Howard's expression flickered. Just for a moment, Eleanor saw rage beneath the mask of righteousness, but he recovered quickly. And who are you, old woman? Another charity case she's taken in? Perhaps you're in on the theft together. I'm Moira McGregor, Moira said, her Scottish accent thickening with anger. And this is my property where she works. Now get off it before I fetch my shotgun and teach you about property rights the hard way. One of Howard's companions, a large man with scarred knuckles, stepped forward menacing. You threatening Mr. Blackwood, Granny? I'm promising him, Moira snapped, and I don't make promises I can't keep. The crowd was fully engaged now, some people backing away from potential violence, others pressing closer. Eleanor could see Samuel Hart making his way toward them, his face concerned. Agnes Campbell had moved to stand beside Eleanor, a silent show of support that meant more than words could express. Howard held up his hands in a gesture of peace. I don't want violence. I just want what's mine. The cow and compensation for the months of milk she's stolen. I'm a reasonable man. I'll settle for the cow and say $50 for the lost revenue. $50. Nearly everything Eleanor had saved. It would destroy them, send them back to nothing. No, Eleanor said, the word emerging stronger than she felt. Clover is mine. She was my mother's and she's mine. I won't give her to you. Then I'll take her, Howard said, his mask slipping further, and I'll see you arrested for theft. Those Those children of yours, they'll go to an orphanage while you rot in jail. Is that what you want? Eleanor felt Rose grab her hand. She hadn't realized her daughter had come to the market with her today. She looked down and saw not just Rose, but all her children, clustered behind her, their faces frightened but determined. James held baby Alice. Little Samuel clutched his wooden horse. They were all here, all watching, all depending on her to be strong. You'll have to arrest me then, Eleanor said quietly, because I won't give you my cow, my business, or my dignity. You took my home once, you tried to take my honor, but you won't take this. Not without a fight. Howard's face twisted with genuine rage now. You stupid woman. Do you think anyone here will believe you over me? I'm a respected landowner. You're nothing. A widow with a bastard brood and delusions of respectability. She's my business partner, Moira said loudly. Haven Dairy is a joint enterprise, and I vouch for her character completely. As do I, Samuel Hart said, finally reaching them. Eleanor Hayes is an honest woman and a skilled craftswoman. I've known her for months now, and I've never seen anything but integrity and hard work. And I, Agnes Campbell added, we all know her here. She's proven herself a dozen times over. Other voices joined in. Mrs. Henderson, despite her earlier doubt, spoke up about the quality of Eleanor's cheese. A farmer who traded vegetables for dairy products defended her prices as fair. Even the fish merchant, who'd never bought cheese in his life, said he'd watched her work and saw nothing but honest labor. Eleanor felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. These people, virtual strangers a few months ago, were standing up for her, were choosing to believe in her when belief was all she had. Howard saw his plan crumbling, and his expression became ugly. Fine, keep your stolen cow, but mark my words, Eleanor. I'll be back. With the law, with proof, with whatever it takes. You can't hide forever in this backwater town. And when I returned, he leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of woman you are. The kind who offers herself to any man with the roof over his head. The kind who uses her children as tools for sympathy. You'll be ruined, completely and utterly ruined. He turned on his heel and strode away, his two companions following. The crowd slowly dispersed, people returning to their business, though Eleanor could hear the whispers starting, speculation, gossip, the seeds of doubt that Howard had planted. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold herself upright. Moira grabbed her arm, steadying her. Come, we're going home. You've had enough for one day. But the cheese, the sales, we'll keep, Moira said firm. Agnes, Samuel, can you mind the stall? They both nodded immediately, and Eleanor let herself be led away, her children clustering around her like chicks, seeking shelter from a storm. The walk back to the dairy felt endless. Rose held her hand tightly. James carried Alice and walked close to Eleanor's other side. The younger children were silent, sensing the gravity of what had happened without fully understanding. When they reached Haven Dairy, Eleanor collapsed onto the bench outside the building, her legs finally giving out. The children gathered around her, uncertain and frightened. Moira disappeared into her house and returned moments later with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. I don't drink, Eleanor protested weakly. You do today, Moira said, pouring generous measures. Medicinal purposes. You've had a shock. Eleanor took the glass with trembling hands and sipped. The whiskey burned going down, but did help steady her nerve. She looked at her children's worried faces and knew she had to be strong for them, had to find words that would ease their fear. Children, she said, her voice hoarse. That man, Howard, he's going to try to cause trouble for us. He's going to tell lies, try to take what we've built. But I need you to remember something. We've done nothing wrong. Every bit of cheese we've made, every penny we've earned has been honest work. No one can take that from us. But Mama, Rose said softly, what if he comes back with the police? What if they believe him? It was a fair question. Eleanor looked at Moira, who met her gaze steadily. Then we'll deal with it, Moira said, together. But Eleanor, the girl has a point. Howard Blackwood has money and influence. If he's determined to destroy you, he might succeed. We need to be prepared. Prepared how? Eleanor asked. Legally, Moira said. You need a lawyer, someone who can document your claim to Clover, who can take statements from people who've witnessed your work ethic and character. We need to build a case, just in case Howard makes good on his threat. Lawyers cost money we don't have, Eleanor said. Then we'll find the money, Moira said firmly. This is too important. Your whole future, your children's futures, depend on it. That night, after the children were asleep, Eleanor sat with Moira in the dairy, the day's milk already processed and stored. The copper kettle gleamed in the lamplight, a reminder of how far they'd come. I'm scared, Eleanor admitted quietly. I've been scared before, when Thomas died, when Howard threw us out. But this is different. This feels like he's going to destroy everything we've built. He might try, Moira said, but you're not alone this time. You have me, you have this community, and you have the truth on your side. That has to count for something. Does it? Eleanor asked bitterly. Howard's truth, his lies, sound more believable than my reality. A desperate widow who seduced her stepfather and stole his property? That's an easy story to believe. Much easier than the truth that a man of his standing would try to force himself on a grieving woman. Moira was quiet for a moment. When Angus and Hamish died, she finally said, my brothers-in-law tried to take this property. They said I was incapable of managing it alone, that I was irrational with grief, that I needed a man's guidance. They had the law on their side. Inheritance laws favored male relatives. They had social opinion on their side. Everyone agreed that a woman alone couldn't run a dairy. They had everything except one thing. What? Eleanor asked. They didn't have my stubbornness, Moira said. I hired a lawyer, spent every penny I had saved. I fought them in court for 18 months, and I won. Not because truth naturally triumphs over lies, but because I refused to give up. Because I made the judge see me not as a hysterical widow, but as a property owner fighting for what was rightfully mine. She looked at Eleanor intently. You have that same stubbornness. I saw it the first day you came here, demanding a chance when you had nothing. You've built this business from nothing. You've kept 7 children alive and thriving. You're stronger than Howard Blackwood, Ellen. Don't let him make you forget that. Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, but resolution. You're right. I can't let him destroy what we've built. Not without a fight. Good, Moira said. Tomorrow we'll go to Calgary. There's a lawyer there, Duncan Fraser. Scottish, like me. Honest, which is rare. I'll pay his retainer. Don't argue. You'll pay me back eventually. We'll tell him everything. Get his advice. Prepare for whatever Howard throws at us. Eleanor nodded, feeling some of her panic receding. They had a plan. It might not be enough, but it was something. As she climbed the stairs to the loft where her children slept, Eleanor paused at the window that looked out over Moira's property. Somewhere out there, in the darkness beyond the reaches of the lamp, 4 cows grazed peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing around them. Clover, who had been the catalyst for everything, the gift that had saved them, the excuse Howard was using to destroy them. I won't let him win, Eleanor whispered into the night. I won't let him take you. I won't let him take any of this. The darkness didn't answer, but Eleanor hadn't expected it to. She was talking to herself, really, making a promise, setting her resolve. Tomorrow they would go to Calgary. Tomorrow they would start building their legal defense. Tomorrow they would fight. But tonight she would hold her children close and be grateful for this moment, this place, this unexpected family she'd found in a stubborn, old Scottish woman who'd given her a chance when no one else would. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight they were safe. For now, that would have to be enough. The trip to Calgary took 2 days. Moira arranged for Samuel Hart to watch the children and manage the dairy in their absence, and she and Eleanor traveled by hired wagon, spending one uncomfortable night at a coaching inn halfway to the city. Duncan Fraser's office was in a modest building near the railway station, and the lawyer himself was exactly as Moira had described. A barrel-chested Scotsman in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a direct manner that Eleanor found reassuring. Tell me everything, Fraser said, pulling out paper and pen. Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out. I'll need dates, names, witnesses if you have them. For 2 hours, Eleanor talked about Thomas's death, the debts, her mother's marriage to Howard, Catherine's death, the months of struggling, Howard's assault, the accusations, the expulsion, about finding Moira, building the dairy, the growth of the business, about Howard's appearance at the market and his threats. Fraser took meticulous notes, occasionally asking for clarification or additional detail. When Eleanor finished, he sat back and studied his notes. It's a difficult case, he said bluntly. Not because you're in the wrong, you're clearly not, but because proving that in court will be challenged. It's your word against Blackwood, and he has money, influence, and the advantage of being a man in a society that tends to believe men over women in such matters. Eleanor felt her hope dimming, but Fraser held up a hand. However, you have several things in your favor. First, you have witnesses to your character and work ethic here in Riverside. Second, you have a business partner in Mrs. McGregor who adds credibility to your claim. Third, and most importantly, Blackwood's claim about the cow is weak. How so? Eleanor asked. He claims you stole the cow, yes, but by his own admission, he gave her to you when he expelled you from his property. That's not theft, that's a gift, possibly made under duress, but still a voluntary transfer of property. Even if he regrets that decision now, he can't simply reclaim a gift because it turned out to be more valuable than he anticipated. Fraser tapped his pen on the desk. What we need to do is establish a clear timeline. Get sworn statements from people who witnessed your arrival in Riverside and your subsequent behavior, and document the growth of your business. If Blackwood tries to press charges, we'll be ready. If he tries to sue for the cow's return, we'll fight it. And if he simply continues to spread malicious gossip, Fraser's expression hardened, we may be able to pursue a defamation claim against him. Eleanor felt a weight lifting. It wasn't certainty, but it was more than she'd had before. It was a path forward, a strategy. There's one more thing, Fraser said. I'm going to send an investigator to Willowbrook to look into Blackwood's affairs. Men like him rarely confine their misdeeds to a single incident. If we can establish a pattern of behavior, other women he's harassed, other people he's cheated, it will strengthen your case immensely. They left Calgary with a signed contract for Fraser's services and a sense of cautious optimism. The trip back to Riverside seemed shorter, though it was the same 2 days. Eleanor found herself thinking about Howard, about his rage in the market, about the promises he'd made to return. He won't give up easily, Eleanor said to Moira as their wagon rattled over the rough prairie road. No, Moira agreed. Men like that never do. Losing to a woman offends their sense of natural order. He'll try again, probably when we least expect it. I hate living in fear, Eleanor said quietly. Hate looking over my shoulder, wondering when he'll appear. Then don't live in fear, Moira said firmly. Live in preparation. We'll be ready for him, whatever he tries. And Eleanor, she paused. Don't underestimate yourself. You've already survived the worst he could throw at you. You walked out of his house with nothing and built something remarkable. That takes strength most people never find in themselves. He knows that now, and it terrifies him. They returned to Riverside to find the children well and the dairy running smoothly under Sam Samuel's supervision. Rose had even made a batch of cheese with Samuel's guidance, and it was setting beautifully in the mold. Eleanor hugged each of her children, feeling the solid reality of them against her, and silently renewed her vow to protect them from Howard's malice. The next few weeks passed in an uneasy calm. Eleanor continued her work, attended market days, and slowly saw some of the doubt that Howard had planted begin to fade as people witnessed her continued integrity. The orders kept coming, the business kept growing, and life maintained its steady rhythm. But Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, couldn't quite relax into the false security of routine. Moira felt it too. Eleanor caught the old woman checking the locks on her doors at night, saw her keeping her shotgun closer than usual. The attack came on a moonless night in late September. Eleanor woke to the sound of Clover's distressed lowing, a sound the gentle cow never made without cause. She sat up in the darkness of the loft, her heart immediately hammering. Around her, the children still slept, exhausted from a long day of work. Eleanor crept to the window and looked down into the yard. At first, she could see nothing in the darkness. Then movement caught her eye. 3 dark figures near the corral where the cows were kept. One was trying to open the gate while the other 2 stood watch. They were trying to take the cows. Eleanor's first instinct was to scream, to wake everyone, to raise an alarm. But something stopped her. A calculation made in an instant. If she screamed, the men would run. They'd escape and return another night, and next time she might not wake in time. Better to confront them now, catch them in the act, have witnesses and evidence. She grabbed her shawl and her boot, moving as quietly as she could. Rose stirred, her eyes opening in the darkness. "Mama," she whispered. "Stay here," Eleanor breathed. "Watch the children. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, run to Moira's house and get help." "Mama, no." But Eleanor was already descending the ladder from the loft, her hands shaking but her resolve firm. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the dairy's cold stove, a poor weapon, but better than nothing, and slipped out the door into the night. The September air was cold, sharp enough to make her breath fall. She could hear the men more clearly now, low voice, the creak of the gate, Clover's continued agitation. She moved around the side of the dairy, using the building's bulk to hide her approach. "Damn cow's making too much noise. Just grab the valuable one and let's go." Blackwood said to take all 4 if we could. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Howard. Of course it was Howard. He hadn't been able to win legally or socially, so he'd sent thieves in the night. She was about to step forward to confront them despite her terror when a voice rang out from the direction of Moira's house. "Step away from those animals." Moira stood on her porch, her shotgun raised and pointed steadily at the 3 men. Behind her, Eleanor could see lamplight. The old woman had been awake, had been watching. The men froze. One of them, the largest, the one Eleanor recognized as Howard's companion from the market, raised his hands mockingly. "Easy now, Granny. We're just passing through. Heard the cows making noise. Thought we'd check on." "At midnight?" Moira's voice was ice. "With rope and a cart hidden in those trees? Try again." The man's expression hard. "Old woman, that shotgun's probably older than you are. Probably doesn't even work. Put it down before you hurt yourself." "It works fine," Moira said. "I cleaned and loaded it this afternoon. Would you like a demonstration?" Eleanor chose that moment to step out of the shadow, her poker raised. "There are 3 of you and 2 of us," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But we're on our own property, defending our livestock from theft. The law's on our side. Leave now or explain yourselves to the constable." The 3 men exchanged looks. The largest one took a step toward Eleanor, menacing in his size and intent. "You think you're so smart, widow? Blackwood told us about you. Said you needed to be taught a lesson about stealing from your better. The only thief here is Blackwood," Eleanor said, "and his hired criminal. Rose," she called toward the dairy, "light the lamp in the window. Signal to Samuel Hart that we need help." She was bluffing. Rose was supposed to stay hidden, but the men didn't know that. The large man hesitated, calculating the risk. If they were caught, if there were witnesses, they'd face real legal consequences. "This isn't over," he growled. "Blackwood doesn't give up. He'll have what's his." "Then he'll have nothing," Eleanor said, "because nothing here belongs to him. Now get off our property before Mrs. McGregor decides to test that shotgun's aim." For a tense moment, Eleanor thought the man might charge her anyway, might decide that silencing both women was worth the risk. But then the sound of a door slamming carried across the night. Samuel Hart, perhaps, or another neighbor waking to the commotion. The calculation shifted. "Let's go," the large man said to his companions. They retreated toward the trees where, as Moira had spotted, a cart waited in the shadow. Within moments, they disappeared into the night, the sound of horses and wheels fading into the distance. Eleanor's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the ground, the poker falling from nerveless fingers. Moira lowered the shotgun and hurried over, moving with surprising speed for a woman her age. "You foolish girl," Moira said, but her voice was gentle. "You should have stayed hidden, should have sent Rose for help immediately." "I couldn't let them take the cows," Eleanor said, her voice shaking now that the danger had passed. "Without the cows, we have nothing. The dairy dies, the business dies, we starve. I couldn't just let it happen." "I know," Moira said, helping Eleanor to her feet. "I know. But Eleanor, they could have hurt you, killed you. What would your children children have done then? Eleanor had no answer for that. She'd acted on instinct, on the desperate need to protect what she'd built. The wisdom of that choice was debatable, but it was done. Rose appeared in the doorway of the dairy, baby Alice in her arms, the other children clustered behind her. "Mama, are you all right?" Eleanor forced herself to stand straight, to project calm despite her shaking hand. "I'm fine, sweetheart." Everyone back to bed. The dangers passed. But as she herded her children back into the loft, as Moira returned to her house with promises to discuss everything in the morning, Eleanor knew the danger hadn't passed at all. It had merely retreated, regrouping for another assault. She lay awake the rest of the night, listening to her children's breathing, planning and replaying the confrontation in her mind. Howard had escalated from public accusations to theft. What would he try next? And how could she protect her family when the law seemed so slow to act and public opinion so easily swayed? As dawn broke gray and cold over the prairie, Eleanor made a decision. They couldn't simply react to Howard's attacks. They needed to take control of the situation, needed to force a confrontation on their terms, with witnesses and evidence in the full weight of the law. She found Moira already awake, making strong tea in her kitchen. "We need to end this," Eleanor said without preamble, "before someone gets hurt, before Howard tries something worse." "Agreed," Moira said. "What do you propose?" "We go to the constable in Riverside. We report the attempted theft. We name Howard as the instigator. Those men said his name. We both heard it. We force the law to investigate him, to look into his affairs." Duncan Fraser said he was already doing that. "Maybe between Fraser's investigation and an official complaint, we can finally get justice." Moira nodded slowly. "It's risky. Blackwood could claim those men were acting without his knowledge. He could sue us for defamation if we can't prove his involvement." "I know," Eleanor said, "but doing nothing is worse. We can't live like this, Moira. I can't raise my children in fear, always looking over our shoulders, always waiting for the next attack. It has to end." "Then we'll end it," Moira said firmly. "Together." "But Eleanor," she met the younger woman's eyes, "be prepared for this to get worse before it gets better. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and we're about to corner Howard Blackwood." That morning, they left Rose in charge of the children and the dairy and traveled into Riverside to file a formal complaint with Constable William Cooper. The constable was a middle-aged man, conscientious but clearly uncomfortable with the situation. A complaint against Howard Blackwood was serious. The man had influence, money, connections. But Eleanor and Moira were firm in their account, their stories matching perfectly because they were true. They described the attack, quoted the men's words naming Blackwood, demanded an investigation. Eleanor produced Duncan Fraser's letter explaining their legal representation and pending case, giving their complaint additional weight. "I'll look into it," Constable Cooper promised, though his reluctance was obvious. "But Mrs. Hayes, you should know, without those men in custody, without proof of Mr. Blackwood's involvement beyond what they allegedly said in the dark, this will be difficult to prosecute." "Then find the men," Eleanor said. "One of them was at the market with Howard when he confronted me publicly. Others saw him. Ask around. Someone will know who he is, where he came from." Cooper nodded, making note. "I'll do what I can. In the meantime, you should consider hiring protection. If Blackwood is behind this, he may try again." "We'll protect ourselves," Moira said grimly. "But Constable, we expect the law to do its job. That's what we pay taxes for, isn't it?" They left the constable's office with mixed feelings. They'd taken action, put things in motion, but whether it would be enough remained to be seen. As they walked back toward the wagon, Samuel Hart intercepted them. "I heard about last night," he said quietly. "Half the town's heard by now. News travels fast. Eleanor, you have friends here, people who believe in you. If Blackwood tries anything else, you won't face it alone." Eleanor felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Thank you, Samuel. That means more than you know. We look after our own," Samuel said simply, "and you're one of us now. Blackwood's got money and influence, but we've got numbers and we've got right on our side. Sometimes that's enough." Sometimes, Eleanor thought, as they drove back to the dairy, sometimes right won. Sometimes David beat Goliath, but sometimes Goliath crushed David beneath his heel, and all the righteousness in the world didn't matter. She just had to hope that this time in this place, right would be enough. The weeks following their complaint to Constable Cooper were tense with waiting. Duncan Fraser sent word that his investigator had uncovered interesting information about Howard Blackwood's business dealings, questionable loans, several properties acquired under suspicious circumstances, and most intriguingly, 2 other women who'd worked in his household and left suddenly under circumstances similar to Ellen. "We're building a case," Fraser wrote, "but it takes time. Be patient, be vigilant, and document everything." Eleanor documented everything. Every sale, every customer, every penny that came in or went out. She kept a journal of the dairy's operations, noting dates and times and witnesses. If Howard tried to claim she was running a fraudulent business or stealing from him, she'd have proof otherwise. The business continued to grow despite the shadow hanging over them. Word of the attempted theft had spread through Riverside and the surrounding communities, and surprisingly, it had worked in Eleanor's favor. People rallied to support what they saw as a hardworking widow being persecuted by a wealthy, vindictive man. Sales actually increased. New customers came specifically because they'd heard Eleanor's story and wanted to help. One of these new customers was a woman named Margaret Chen, who owned a boarding house house in Medicine Hat. She visited Haven Dairy in early October, introduced herself, and spent an hour talking with Eleanor about cheese, business, and the challenges women faced running their own enterprise. "I heard about your trouble with Blackwood," Margaret said as Eleanor showed her the aging room. "Similar thing happened to me when I first started my boarding house. A man who thought he had a claim to me tried to ruin my business. The difference is I had family, brothers who made it clear he'd face consequences if he persisted. You don't have that protection." "I have friends," Eleanor said, "and I have the law, however slowly it moves." Margaret smiled. "Good, but just in case, here's a standing order. I want 10 wheels of cheese per week for my boarding house. I serve 3 meals a day to 20 regular guests plus travelers. Good cheese is always in demand." And Eleanor, she met the younger woman's eyes, "This order stands regardless of what Blackwood does or says. Even if he somehow succeeds in damaging your reputation elsewhere, I'll still buy from you. Some of us know what it's like to be a woman alone in a man's world. We have to support each other." Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you. You don't know what that means." "I think I do," Margaret said gently. "Now let's discuss prices and delivery schedule." That evening, Eleanor sat with Moira on the porch of the stone house, watching the autumn sun paint the prairie in shades of gold and amber. The children were finishing their evening chores. Rose was helping James milk the cows. Lily and Grace were feeding the chickens. Samuel was gathering eggs. Even little Henry, now 2 years old, was helping by carrying small sticks for kindling. "Margaret Chen's order changes everything," Eleanor said. 10 wheels a week guaranteed. That's steady income we can count on. We can plan expansion, maybe hire help eventually. If we survive Blackwood's vendetta," Moira said pragmatically. "Don't count chickens before they hatch, girl. We're not safe yet." As if summoned by the mention of danger, they saw a rider approaching on the road from Riverside. As he drew closer, Eleanor recognized Constable Cooper. Her stomach clenched with anxiety. Cooper dismounted and approached with his hat in his hand, his expression grave. "Mrs. Hayes, Mrs. McGregor, I have news." "Bad news?" Moira asked bluntly. "Mixed," Cooper admitted. "We found the men who attacked your property. One of them was arrested in Calgary for another crime. Seems he's a professional thief. When confronted with the potential charges from your incident, he talked, confirmed he was hired by Howard Blackwood specifically to steal your cows and, if possible, intimidate you into leaving the area." Eleanor's heart leaped. "That's proof. That's everything we need." "It is," Cooper agreed, "but there's a complication. Blackwood has lawyers, expensive ones. They're arguing that this man is a known criminal whose testimony can't be trusted, that he's making up stories to reduce his own sentence. They're claiming Blackwood is being falsely accused by a vengeful woman who stole from him." "That's a lie," Eleanor protested. "I know," Cooper said, "and most people here know. But Eleanor, this is going to trial in Calgary before a judge. It'll be your word and the word of a confessed criminal against Blackwood and his legal team. Duncan Fraser is good, but this won't be easy." Eleanor felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. A trial, public testimony, her children's futures hanging in the balance. But what choice did she have? Running would mean abandoning everything they'd built. Staying and doing nothing would leave them vulnerable to Howard's next attack. "When?" she asked. 3 weeks, Cooper said. "November 2nd. You'll need to be in Calgary, prepared to testify. Fraser will handle the legal strategy, but Eleanor," he looked at her seriously, "be ready. They're going to try to destroy your character, paint you as exactly what Blackwood's been claiming. It won't be pleasant." After Cooper left, Eleanor sat in stunned silence. 3 weeks. 3 weeks until everything would be decided. Her reputation, her business, her children's future. All of it hanging on whether a judge would believe her or Howard. "I'm scared," she admitted to Moira. "Good," Moira said. "Fear keeps you sharp. But Eleanor, remember, you've already survived the worst of what Blackwood could do. He threw you out with nothing, expecting you to fail, expecting you to disappear or die quietly. Instead, you built something remarkable. That's not luck or accident. That's strength and skill. Trust in that when you're in that court." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Duncan Fraser came to Riverside twice, coaching Eleanor on testimony, preparing her for the questions she'd face. He took statements from Samuel Hart, from Agnes Campbell, from Margaret Chen, and a dozen other customers who could speak to Eleanor's character and business practice. "The key," Fraser explained, "is to make this not just about the attempted theft, but about Blackwood's entire pattern of behavior. The judge needs to see him not as a respectable man falsely accused, but as a predator who's finally being held accountable." Fraser's investigator had found the 2 other women who'd worked in Blackwood's household. Both were willing to testify about his inappropriate advances, about the threats he'd made when they refused him, about the leases he'd spread afterward. Their stories eerily echoed Eleanor's own experience. "This is bigger than just your case," Fraser told Eleanor. "This is about showing that men like Blackwood can't act with impunity, that women's testimony matters, that the law protects everyone, not just the wealthy and influential." The night before they were to leave for Calgary, Eleanor gathered her children in the loft. Rose, now 11 and so mature for her age, held baby Alice. James sat close to Eleanor's side. The younger ones clustered around, sensing the importance of the moment. "Tomorrow I'm going to Calgary," Eleanor said. "Mrs. McGregor and Mr. Fraser will be with me. Rose, you'll be in charge here, with Mr. Hart checking in daily. I need you all to be brave and good while I'm gone." "How long will you be away?" Lily asked, her voice small. "I don't know, sweetheart. A few days, maybe a week, but I will come back. No matter what happens in that courtroom, I will come back to you. Will the bad man be there? Samuel asked. The one who tried to take our cows? Eleanor hesitated, then decided on honesty. Yes, Mr. Blackwood will be there, and he's going to say mean things about me, things that aren't true, but I'm going to tell the truth, and I'm going to trust that the judge will see who's lying and who's telling the truth. The truth always wins, James said confidently. That's what Papa used to say. Eleanor hugged her son, hoping desperately that Thomas had been right, that truth and justice weren't just pretty words, but actual forces in the world. The journey to Calgary took 2 days. Eleanor, Moira, and Duncan Fraser traveled together, going over testimony and strategy. Fraser had arranged for them to stay at a modest hotel near the courthouse, and on the morning of November 2nd, Eleanor, dressed in her best clothes, still worn and patched, but clean and respectable, and prepared to face her accuser. The courtroom was smaller than Eleanor had imagined, but intimidating nonetheless. Dark wood paneling, a high bench where Judge Harrison sat, rows of seats where spectators gathered. Howard Blackwood sat at one table with 2 well-dressed lawyers, his expression confident. Eleanor sat at another table with Duncan Fraser, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them shake. The proceedings began with the prosecutor, a young man named Thomas Wright, who'd taken the case at Fraser's urging, laying out the charges: conspiracy to commit theft, witness intimidation, fraud in his initial claims about the cow's ownership. The crimes were serious, carrying potential prison time. Howard's lawyers argued that their client was the victim, a generous man who'd taken in his stepdaughter in her time of need, only to be betrayed and falsely accused when he'd refused her improper advance. The cow had been his property, given in a moment of anger perhaps, but rightfully his to reclaim. The attempted theft charge was based entirely on the testimony of a known criminal trying to reduce his own sentence. Then came the testimony. The thief who'd been caught spoke first, his voice sullen but clear. Yes, Blackwood had hired him. Yes, the job was specifically to take the cows and scare the widow. Yes, he'd been paid $50 up front, with another $50 promised upon completion. Howard's lawyers tore into him viciously, highlighting his criminal record, suggesting he'd say anything to reduce his sentence, implying he had been coached by Fraser. The man held firm on the key fact, but Eleanor could see doubt creeping into Judge Harrison's expression. Then Eleanor took the stand. Fraser led her through her story gently. Thomas's death, the debts, moving to Howard's house, the assault, the expulsion. She spoke clearly despite her terror, looking at the judge rather than at Howard, refusing to let shame color her testimony. And when Mr. Blackwood gave you the cow, Fraser asked, did he indicate it was a loan, that you would need to return it? No, Eleanor said firmly. He said, she swallowed, reciting the words exactly as she remembered them. Take that stupid cow your mother loved and get out. It's more than you deserve. It was clear he was giving her to me, expecting that one cow wouldn't be enough to keep me and 7 children alive. Howard's lawyers cross-examined her brutally. They questioned her moral, her motive, her memory of events. They suggested she'd misinterpreted Howard's intentions, that grief over her husband's death had clouded her judgment, that she was a desperate woman willing to lie to protect what she'd stolen. Eleanor held her ground, answering each question honestly, refusing to be provoked into anger or tears. When they suggested she'd seduced Howard, she met their eyes calmly and said, I was 6 months widowed with a 6-month-old baby. I was grieving, exhausted, and desperate. The last thing on my mind was seducing anyone. Mr. Blackwood came to my locked room uninvited and tried to force himself on. That's the truth, whether you choose to believe it or not. The other 2 women testified next, their stories providing a pattern that was hard to dismiss. Sarah Miller, who'd been a housekeeper for Howard 3 years ago. Patricia Green, who'd worked as a governess for his neighbor, but had caught Howard's unwanted attention. Both described his advances, his threats, his vindictiveness when rejected. Howard's lawyers argued these women were part of a conspiracy, coached by Fraser, motivated by jealousy or greed. But their testimonies were consistent, detailed, and delivered with the kind of specificity that came from lived experience rather than fabrication. Moira testified about Eleanor's character, about the work she'd witnessed, about the attempted theft she'd personally confronted. Samuel Hart spoke about Eleanor's integrity in business deals. Agnes Campbell described the growth of Haven Dairy and Eleanor's reputation in the community. Margaret Chen traveled from Medicine Hat specifically to testify about her confidence in Eleanor's products and character. The trial lasted 3 days. 3 days of testimony, argument, counter-argument, legal maneuver. Eleanor felt wrung out, exhausted, uncertain. She couldn't read Judge Harrison's expression, couldn't tell if he believed her or Howard, if justice would prevail or if money and influence would win, as they so often did. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Judge Harrison called for closing argument. Howard's lawyers argued eloquently for their client's innocence, painting him as a victim of a vengeful woman's scheme. Fraser argued just as eloquently for justice, for believing women's testimony, for seeing patterns of behavior rather than isolated incidents. Then Judge Harrison announced he would render his verdicts the following morning, and everyone was dismissed. Eleanor barely slept that night, lying awake in the hotel room, praying to a God she wasn't sure was listening. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread. This wasn't just a case about cattle theft. It was a case about power and gender, and whether women's voices mattered in the eyes of the law. Judge Harrison Harrison entered, his expression grave. Everyone stood, then sat at his gesture. The room was silent enough to hear breathing. I've considered all the testimony carefully, Harrison began. This is not a simple case of theft, nor a simple case of he said, she said. What we have here is a pattern of behavior by Mr. Blackwood, corroborated by multiple witnesses that speaks to his character and his intention. Eleanor's heart began to pound. The testimony of the three women, Mrs. Hayes, Miss Miller, and Miss Green, is remarkably consistent in describing Mr. Blackwood's behavior. While any one account might be dismissed as misunderstanding or false accusation, three separate accounts describing nearly identical patterns of behavior cannot be easily dismissed. Furthermore, Mrs. Hayes' character witnesses are numerous and credible, while Mr. Blackwood has provided no similar testimony to his character beyond his own protestations of innocence. Harrison looked directly at Howard. Mr. Blackwood, I find the evidence against you compelling. The testimony of the hired thief, corroborated by the timeline of events, and the testimony of Mrs. McGregor, who witnessed the attempted theft, convinces me that you did indeed conspire to steal property from Mrs. Hayes. Your initial claim that the cow was yours and was stolen by Mrs. Hayes is not supported by the evidence. By your own admission, you gave the animal to her, and a gift once given cannot be reclaimed simply because the giver regrets his generosity. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face but couldn't stop them. On the charges of conspiracy to commit theft, I find you guilty. On the charges of fraud regarding ownership of livestock, I find you guilty. On the charges of witness intimidation, I find you guilty. Harrison's voice was iron. Furthermore, I am referring the testimony regarding your conduct toward the women in your household to the prosecutor's office for potential additional charges of assault and harassment. This is outrageous, Howard shouted, half rising from a seat. I'm a respected landowner. This widow is nothing. She's Mr. Blackwood, Harrison interrupted coldly. You will control yourself or be removed from this courtroom. Mrs. Hayes is a businesswoman and a mother who has demonstrated remarkable character and resilience. Your continued attempts to demean her only strengthen my conviction that the verdict is just. Howard sat down, his face purple with rage. Harrison continued. Your sentence is as follows. 5 years imprisonment for conspiracy to commit theft. 2 years for fraud to run concurrently. A fine of $500 to be paid to Mrs. Hayes as compensation for damages and legal costs. Additionally, all claims you have made regarding ownership of livestock or property currently held by Mrs. Hayes are hereby declared null and void. The cow in question, and any subsequent livestock Mrs. Hayes has acquired are legally and unambiguously her property. The judge's gavel fell with a sound like thunder. This court is adjourned. Eleanor couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 5 years. Howard would be in prison for 5 years. She was safe. Her children were safe. Haven Dairy was safe. It was over. Moira grabbed her hand, squeezing hard. Duncan Fraser was smiling, gathering his papers. Around them, spectators were murmuring, some in approval, some in shock that a man of Howard Blackwood's standing had been brought down by the testimony of women he'd tried to destroy. Howard was led away in chains, still protesting, still insisting on his innocence and Eleanor's guilt, but no one was listening anymore. The judge had spoken. Justice impossibly had been done. The journey back to Riverside was triumphant. They stopped at towns along the way, and somehow word had preceded them. People congratulated Eleanor, offered to buy her cheese, told her she'd done a brave thing. By the time they reached Riverside, there was a small crowd waiting to welcome her home. Samuel Hart had organized a celebration at his bakery. The children were there, Rose keeping them together and watching for Eleanor's arrival. When Eleanor stepped down from the wagon, Rose rushed to her, and suddenly all 7 children were clustered around her, hugging her, crying, laughing. Did you win, Mama? James asked. Did the judge believe you? Yes, Eleanor said, her voice breaking with joy. Yes, he believed me. We won. We're safe now. We're really, truly safe. That night, back at Haven Dairy, Eleanor stood in the aging room, surrounded by wheels of cheese in various stages of maturity. Each one represented work, skill, faith in the future. In a few months, they'd need more space. They were already discussing building an addition to the dairy, hiring help, perhaps even buying more land. Moira found her there, standing among the fruits of their labor, thinking deep thoughts, thinking about beginnings and ending, Eleanor said. 6 months ago, I was cast out with nothing but a cow and 7 starving children. I thought we'd die. I thought Howard had destroyed us. But you didn't die, Moira said. You thrived, built something remarkable, raised your children, and made a difference in this community. That's not just survival, Eleanor. That's triumph. Eleanor smiled through tears. We did it together. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You taught me, protected me, believed in me. I couldn't have done this without you. Maybe, Moira allowed, but I couldn't have brought this place back to life without you either. Funny how things work out. I thought I was just being practical, letting you use the dairy. Turns out I was finding the family I'd lost. Strange how the universe works sometimes. They stood together in comfortable silence, 2 women who'd both lost everything and found each other. Outside, the prairie stretched endless under a sky full of stars. Inside, 7 children slept safely, their bellies full, their future secure. And in the cool darkness of the aging room, wheels of cheese continued their slow transformation, milk becoming something richer, more complex, more valuable with time and patience and care, much like the women who made them.